So yeah, let's talk about the set that we're sitting on right now. So a lot has changed.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I really have a hard time remembering because there have been so many changes, and we've gone back and forth as far as the main sets. For people who don't know TV, we're talking about the anchor desk. But remember, when I first started, I was on the noon anchor desk, but my main place that I lived was Good Morning Jacksonville. And so back then we had the news anchor had her own chair, and then we had a couch. And that was like back in the corner. I had really done very little TV. So what I remember first about the studio was even bigger than this. And the ramp, we have a ramp that goes into this building, as you know, but that wall was not there. So that when they wanted to do car and truck commercials, they would drive the vehicles into the studio and do those commercials. And I remember, like if there was severe weather or something, we'd have to wait for them to finish their car and truck commercials.
That's crazy.
Yes. So I started TV in '81, came here in '82. But in '81, at my first two stations, we did not have computer graphics. We literally drew our weather maps. One of two ways. Before the show, we would use colored crayons. And then when I came here for about a year or so, it was before we went to chroma key, which is when we have the backdrop and we can use computer graphics. But initially, drew weather maps here too. Literally would pull out, the old classic and draw on the wall. We would have magnetic numbers, and I had one particular noon show where I came downstairs to do the noon show. Unbeknownst to me, the numbers had fallen. The engineers had put the numbers back up, but I didn't look, and I was just talking. And the next thing you know, I said at noon that it was 32 degrees in Miami and 92 in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And that kind of stuff would happen frequently. What I remember most about before we went to computer graphics is, so I would be, the weather center then was upstairs in the second floor, back in a little corner. There's like a portion of a room we have up there now. So two things. We would have these facsimile maps, satellite pictures. And they would come out once every 3 hours. That's why now that we get satellite loop updates in all kind of color every 5 minutes, I wish I could get the kids, the rest of the weather team, to understand the phenomenon. I mean, we would, because especially in hurricane season, outside of the hurricane hunters, that's the only way you could tell what was happening out there was satellite pictures, right? They were real grainy, like different shades of gray. And, but when I came here, the chief meteorologist then, Ray Berlin, told me the standard operating procedure. And part of that was I would come in at 2 o'clock in the morning, and where the Gulf is, or the Caribbean or the Atlantic, I would have a blue crayon and draw in blue for water, green for land. And I remember going, I sweat blood over differential equations so I could draw colors. But we did that for a long time. Now, another point to me being upstairs is that I would only come down, or Ray did the same thing. We would only come down for the news shows. We would, someone would come up. We'd have like these little, we had typewriters back then. Typewriters. And we'd write up our script, but that would go to the producers and directors, which were upstairs. Bottom line is, I wouldn't see the news anchors until I was actually on the set. Would hardly ever see the producers. The directors would be upstairs, take it to the directors. Therefore, the communication between what we thought we were saying about the weather and what the news anchors were going to say, sometimes I didn't know until we were saying it. I know that sounds ridiculous, especially for people at home, but it was a really good lesson for me. Now, I had to learn that lesson the hard way, but it was a really good lesson of, I may think I know what I'm communicating about the weather, but I would just hang out there for hours, come down for my 5 minutes and go back upstairs again and not, mess with news people. And sometimes it could be night and day. What I thought I was communicating was going to happen with the weather and the producer. What people may not realize is that, so the technology is fantastic. For both as forecasters, satellite pictures we get come out loops every 5 minutes. Radar is amazing. The computer models almost more than we can handle, but the weather graphics that we use to draw, and some of the weather graphics come down naturally. Or what I mean is the system itself will draw maps, although we like to draw our own maps. But during that whole time, I've always been, or for the majority of my time, I've been in this building. Much of that time upstairs, and eventually they did move me downstairs to where the weather team, you could see us walking from one place in the studio to the weather center, and that's changed through the decades. But despite technology, my dream had always been to have a window to look out the weather. And I think, and I've been through a lot of news directors, which is like my immediate boss, and I think they thought I was joking. Like, what's the big deal about having a window? Well, that's how Timmy D started with weather, looking out the window. And I still say to this day, as fantastic as technology is, there's nothing better than eyeballing the weather. Anybody who's been in this building for any amount of time, who maybe has looked for me because they've needed me and they wonder where I am, about every 30 minutes, I will walk around the building. Where that came from is Dr. Das, Indian professor. I say that because he was the one who would teach the mathematics, is what he would call it. In-depth mathematics. And these differential equations are what, to this day, go into the computer models. And we all had to learn that, even though the only people that really use that are those who become the PhDs and they're modeling the new models. But we all had to learn where that came from. Despite the fact that, in my opinion, he was the most, what would you call it? He was, anyhow, there's a whole aspect of meteorology that really just comes down. He was the most numerical. He was our numerical PhD meteorologist, okay, which is why they're called the numerical models. So, in-depth physics stuff. And last day of class, as seniors, and we had this 12th floor building at Texas A&M that had windows, and he's speaking in his heavy English, and I won't try to imitate, but he basically said, I want you students, there were like only 6 of us as senior, I want you to remember this one thing. And we're like hanging on the edge, but my head is already saying, because I had a hard time with differential equations, my head was already thinking, I'm not going to understand what he's saying, but I'm going to listen. Here's his final statement. And he looks at us, he says, don't forget to look out the window. And he laughed, but that stuck with me. And then when I started here, there was also a private forecasting firm called Gateway Weather, which the chief, Ray Boylan, ran that. And there were his old hurricane hunter buddies. That's where he was. His old buddies were hurricane hunters. They all retired here. They used to fly out of NAS Jackson decades and decades ago. But as Navy observers, and like a Robert Spetta will tell you the same thing to this day, that because you are also making observations for pilots, landing and taking off, that you had to log at least once an hour that you actually did look outside. So what Dr. Das said was then supported by these meteorologists that have been around forever. And so, I mean, I took it as gospel. And of course, to this day, still do it. I've so many people ask this question, and I get it, and I've even asked myself. My mom was a nurse, so kind of science, right? But health sciences. My dad was way more on the comptroller side. I don't remember having anybody in the family in the earth sciences, what we call meteorology. So I don't know exactly where that came from, but as an asthmatic, and evidently had pretty severe asthma, that in Delaware, which is where I was a little Timmy Deegan, I'm talking about 4, 5, 6 years old, during the summer, I think because of the pollen and the mildew and the mold and stuff, it was finally determined it was probably best very often for me to stay inside. And for a while, my bedroom was the only bedroom that had an air conditioner for my parents, just so it was filtered air. And I remember being on my knees, and I would look out the window at the other kids playing. Now, some people feel sorry for me. I didn't back then, just because that's how That's how I initially grew up. But for whatever reason, but I do think it has something to do with it, I spent so much time looking out the window, yes, at them, but somehow I was drawn to the sky. And I started drawing pictures of clouds. And as at least I think many little boys, maybe some little girls do this, eventually what was exciting to me were I would draw these clouds that would eventually become storms, right? And I mean, I would have hundreds of pictures I'd start with one cloud, then two clouds, and then at some point, and I don't remember when, my parents don't remember, but at some point, either they or a kindergarten teacher introduced me to a weather book. And then once that happened, game over. Would come down, I was the oldest in the family, would come downstairs even as a first grader. Dad would be up first, I would be up, he'd be reading the paper. At some point, he would send page 2 to me. Back then it was the Philadelphia Inquirer. But even to this day, you go around the world, and for wherever there are still newspapers, you go to page 2 and it's the weather map, right? And so that whole trend, that whole exposure to a weather book, there's such thing as the science of weather, and then weather maps. Then I started drawing my own weather maps, and then I don't think I knew what a meteorologist was necessarily until about 2nd or 3rd grade, but by then I was definitely watching. Even back then, I wanted to watch the people who had degrees, and his name was Dr. Francis Davis out of Philadelphia, and that's when I learned to be a meteorologist. So as a 2nd or 3rd grader, I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what kind of classes I had to take, but I knew that I wanted to be a meteorologist. It's a great question, because you're right. I did not know the TV business, but I certainly learned moving here to Jacksonville that for a lot of my fellow peers, that is people in their 20s, I learned that there was a tendency that Jacksonville was back then, of course, we're a bigger market now, but back then we were just big enough market to get young people out of college who are very talented, but they would automatically go to the big markets. Back then it was like Atlanta and Miami. And but certainly the normal process was if you wanted to get a promotion, make more money, then you went to other places. And I get that, and even now that happens somewhat, I understand that. But you have to remember that although, yes, I desperately wanted a job where they would pay me to do meteorology, I was fortunate enough, if you think about the timing, as I graduated in 1981, that's really when the morning news shows were just starting all over the country. And so all over the country, here in Jacksonville, our station was the first in this city. But it was just beginning where they were hiring meteorologists. And if you think about it, what that meant was suddenly stations throughout the country were increasing the amount of meteorologists they needed by at least 30%. So the timing for me was amazing, especially because I thought I was going to get the job at the National Weather Service. I thought anybody, to be honest with you, I thought anybody on TV was a clown because I was, a pure college scientist, even though I knew there were some meteorologists on TV. But there was a freeze on hiring at the National Weather Service because the Republicans and Democrats couldn't come up with a budget, if you can imagine that happening. So I just happened to be exposed to TV because I was just looking for a job, and I got a job at KBTX because no one else tried out for the job. That's literally why I got the job. And then I got to intern that fall because that very first fall, an Aggie owned a TV station in Corpus Christi, and they wanted that person to intern. And so suddenly, from doing no TV, my very last fall semester, which I thought was going to be just plain watching football, I was getting up at 4 a.m. to be the meteorologist at KBTX, basically for farmers in Bryan College Station, Monday through Friday, and then I would go and intern in Corpus during the weekend. Anyhow, bottom line is, I was fortunate enough when I graduated from Texas A&M in December, I actually got a job offer from 3 different places. And as most people know, not only do I like to surf, even back then, for me, it wasn't just a sport, it was a lifestyle. I mean, I was really hoping to get a job someplace where I could also surf. So when I was offered a job in a few other places, which was very nice, but when I was offered a job here in Jacksonville, which for someone coming straight out of college, it was a pretty good sized market. But then where also I could live at the beach. In fact, I remember my very first phone call to my dad is when I told him I got the job. Evidently, I went on and on about how I was going to be at work in the morning, surf in the afternoon. I'm going to live half a block off the beach. And he finally said, well, Tim, what are they going to pay you? And I said, $11,500. He said, what? But, I think things got better as life went on. But truly for me, I moved here, yes, definitely be a broadcast meteorologist, but because I was going to be paid near the ocean. So that's a long-winded way of saying I moved here really for the lifestyle. So although then as life went on, I did get some offers in other places, which was nice. By then I was married, had a family, the family liked it here, and just sort of got to grow up as Jacksonville grew. Okay, so I do a mic check, and I've actually done several through the years, but I think the one that many people hear at work, and of course don't hear at home very often, is around the rough and rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. Now, as life went on, because I do like to run, but I also like to surf, it also, for anybody who cared in the station, was a clue to what I actually did that day. So some days I would say, around the rough and rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran into the ocean, or versions of that. Now, I was also taught, amidst the mists and coldest frosts, with stoutest wrists and loudest boasts, he thrusts his fists against the post and still insists he sees the ghost. Or, I'll smile for miles and miles. Now, this next one I have to be very careful about. He sits and shifts and shifts and sits. Okay, I got it. So where did that all come from? To me, this is a funny story. So I knew that in 1982, our station, which back then was WTLV, Channel 12 Delivers, I knew they had a speech coach. Her name was Flo Sykes. And as I say the name Flo Sykes, there will be people in the Jacksonville area who, in fact, if they were my age or younger, maybe they had Flo Sykes. Flo Sykes was also a drama teacher and involved also, I believe, at Episcopal. But she was a speech coach at the station. And when I first came in, they had me see her once every day for 2 weeks in a row. Good Morning Jacksonville, it seems like it started like 2 or 3 weeks after I actually got here. I got here on January 20th. Good Morning Jacksonville started a little bit later. And it was immediately determined, or they felt like I had a lazy tongue. That's they had me working on the S's and stuff. And so I would see her for like every day, 15 to 20 minutes. Amazing woman. She found out I was a young single guy. She basically adopted me. She became like my aunt. It just became a dear friend for me. But here's the funny part. I assumed, which makes no sense now to me, why I thought that. I assumed everybody saw her every day. Well, as it turns out, she was really just a consultant. The main news anchors would maybe see her once every 6 months. But because they felt like I had such a lazy tongue, I was going in there every day, and she would give me these drills. And I took it serious. And these drills were printed out, and I would go home and memorize. I mean, there were like 20 of them. Those are just like the 4 or 5 I remember. But that's where it comes from, was from Flo Sykes, who said, Timmy, she said, Tim, you have a lazy mouth, and we need to figure out ways to wake it up. Okay, so I think you have to go back to how I first started, which was drawing weather maps. And what I didn't realize initially, but as time went on, especially when we would pull that one out and do it with the magic markers, for most of us in meteorology on TV, most of what we say is not scripted. So we're ad-libbing. And what I found was, and I personally feel the best way to communicate to people, if it's possible, is to almost have them hear you or see you thinking about the best way to talk about something. And I found that that's what that drawing did. That yes, hopefully that would end up being a picture that made sense to people, but I found out for me, it sort of helped that whole connection of like, maybe we can all learn this together. Sort of like fellow forecasters or people at home, we can make this decision together. I personally think that's why it happened with teachers, that it wasn't just that you could draw stuff, that at least for some students, and I kind of think I remember doing this even as a kid, to where, if the person is doing that while they're talking, you can kind of follow their line of thinking, right? So that was always in my head. In fact, I don't think I really noticed how much that helped me communicate until we no longer did that. because now we had computer graphics. And so we kind of joked, and then at one point, it may have been Mike Prangley, somebody got a blackboard that someone else in the news station was using for a news package. And, I know, and it's a combination of things. Here's what else happened. I hadn't thought about this in a while. If there was a consistent pattern, if there was a consistent critique for consultants for me for 43 years, it was, Tim, it's almost like you have 80% of what you're going to say in your head when you come to the mic. And that was very true. And they were constantly trying to get me to focus on that final 10%. Because as you know, we get very busy. And there were many times where only half jokingly, where I've said, this TV thing gets in the way. And a lot of it was just the weather kid and me excited about the weather. It's like, really, I got to go in the air. I want to follow this storm. But that meant was I really sometimes didn't focus at the final 10%. And so we started using notes on the blackboard to help everybody focus on what our focus was going to be that day. And eventually it became, sort of what it is now, which is like all over the place. So for those who don't remember, the 1996 Olympics were in Atlanta. And just like we've always seen, the torch will go through the country. And so it'd been going through our country. And because we're so close to Atlanta, I believe it was making the track up from South Florida through Jacksonville, and then the final trip up to Georgia. So it was during the summer. It was getting pretty close actually to the Olympics. Just like now, back then we were the Olympic station, and the Olympic station, as it went through each market, that station got to pick one person who would do it. And I was really honored because, I am honored, was honored. And I think all of us like the Olympics to an extent, but it has always meant so much to me. Yeah, definitely as athletics, but just the whole meaning of somehow all of us, at least for a few moments in the summer, coming together, right? And so that was a huge honor. And back then even, Alex's show was one of the top shows. And why he came to Jacksonville, I don't know. A sales department may have told me at some point. It may have been that maybe we had some of the best numbers. I don't know. But yeah, so you can imagine the logistics of that, because all of us only ran, I don't even think a mile, because they wanted a lot of, because there were some city leaders who also ran that through Jacksonville. So it was but everybody has to keep moving, right? So it was a very choreographed, and so they put 30 of us in a bus. So we were gonna, I don't know, maybe 30 of us would cover the next 5 miles or something. And Alex Trebek, is the one who handed me and of course, the big old torch, you don't want to blow your moment and drop the torch, right? So Alex, in a very kind way, and I was thinking it, so I was so glad he says, "Hey Tim, you want to practice?" Yeah. So we were out in the parking lot practicing and handing over. Now there was a TV moment that TV people can appreciate, but people at home maybe didn't notice. So they gave us all a uniform, and it was the white Olympic shirt, white shorts, and they're nice, but they're not shorts I would have run in. I run in shorts with drawstrings. I like loose shorts, but to keep them tight. I'll just leave it there, okay? And that's without a mic. At the very last moment, and there was a reporter there, at the very last moment, somebody at our station decided, why don't we just clip the mic to Tim's shorts? Now these shorts, again, had no drawstring, and there was no plan to do this, and they're not gonna wait for us to get it right. Okay, I'll try. And remember, one of my hands is holding the torch. And so, although they edited it out, if you were to see the full extent of me as I'm going down San Jose and there's kids clapping and I really want to look good, proud moment. I did happen to be a runner, right? So I was going to be running like this. No, I'm running with one hand here and one hand holding up my shorts because I have a microphone hanging from my shorts and my shorts are, wanting to fall down to my knees. That was not quite the Olympic moment I was looking forward to. I remember us practicing. I don't know if Eddie said anything He was a witty guy. I remember on the bus. He was great, by the way. On the bus, and there were just a bunch of us regular people. He was gracious, but immediately ran the conversation. Witty guy, as we all know. He's intelligent guy. So he probably did say something significant to me when he handed it to me, but I don't. Yeah. I just remember, don't drop the torch to him.
Or your shorts.
Or my shorts, yeah. Right.
Not the torch or your shorts. So this is no news to you. You met your wife, Donna, here.
Yes. Yes.
So I was at the interview. Obviously, you know that we interviewed her a couple weeks ago. One of the things she said is when she was going through her health challenges, and she was here, right?
Yes.
Going through her.
Yes.
So she said one of the things that she recalled during that time is that she says she remembers you saying that you were able to hear her laugh across the newsroom, and that's how you knew that she was doing okay.
Absolutely. For people, it's hard to explain how significant that was for me. So to try to paint the picture here, the weather center was back in a corner, and then Donna was in the newsroom, probably 50 yards away, but I couldn't see her, but I could hear her, especially for the 11 o'clock. Because for those who don't know, by the 11 o'clock, management has left, salespeople have left. There's not many people here. What attracted me to Donna and other people are those who have that authentic laugh all the time. And if anybody's been around Donna, yes, she has a great sense of humor, but she doesn't fake it. Okay, I probably, certainly when I was younger, to be nice to people, I know I have a fake laugh. She has this authentic, from the gut laugh. So for her first diagnosis and then her second diagnosis and their third, I knew that while she was at work, she didn't want the sickness to be about her. But I knew how bad she was feeling, certainly mentally, the stress, all that stuff, but even just physically. I mean, I don't know if she shared this, but some of the news anchors, the males who would sit on the desk with her know this, that there were times she'd have a bucket next to her. That's how bad she would be, especially when they were doing the chemo. But I was certainly concerned about her physically, but more I was concerned, where was her state of mind, especially late at night. And, but when the person goes through that 3 times, how many millions of times can you ask, how are you doing? And so anyhow, for all those reasons, although it may not sound like much for me, it could have been Alan Janae, it could have been Shannon Ogden, it could have been a number, Albert Zip, a number of different anchors. So I couldn't necessarily hear them, but they were all sort of smart Alex in their own way. But yeah. When I could hear an authentic laugh, like about 10 o'clock at night from Donna come around the corner, it's like, okay, the world is good. Well, there's something on TV called chit chat, and that is that on the set, we don't do it as much, it seems like these days, as we used to, but it really was for anchors to talk to each other on the camera, and I think also show people that, we are friends. And very often that's legitimate, but sometimes because of time constraints, that's pretty short stuff. And sometimes it's really not much more than polite conversation. What I found over a very short period of time is that to put it plainly, we would argue about public policy in a big way. And we look back on it now, and it wasn't like we were 180, but we definitely disagreed on stuff. And I realized after a while, I was looking forward to talking to her the next day. And I'm sure it was simply because I was going to show this smart news anchor that she's not right. And she basically would call me an idiot. But there was something about arguing about, and it was mostly about, think about this, it was mostly about public policy. And we would argue and argue and argue, and then of course we'd have to go do our jobs, and then right back to it, even if it was just for 5 minutes. I mean, it would continue for a long, I'm talking months. And so when people say today, you know, Tim, did you know that Donna was going to be a mayor? Well, certainly, you know, I think a lot of people were even surprised that she won. But Tim, were you surprised that she ran for being a mayor? I couldn't have predicted that back in the 90s. But as you see how she went from what she decided to do with the foundation, and then that being healthcare, certainly that gets involved with public policy, right? That then eventually, year after year, then maybe running for public office makes some sense. But now, when I look back to the public policy debates we'd have with each other so long ago, you can now see this, it kind of makes sense that she at least wanted to be in the room, you know?
And now she's making history as the.
And she will still sometimes come down the hallway after a full day of work, and you'd think as a 65-year-old man, by now I would learn, and daggum if I don't try to mansplain to her and try to win public policy debates, and I'm still not winning those debates. So, first gentleman, I think that's elevates me too much. I think first dude is probably closer. Again, I'll go back to those very first conversations that she doesn't share, you know, intimate stuff with me, but we both have always cared about public policy in Jacksonville. And so like even the next morning, you know, before she ran for mayor, and of course we never had a clue if she would actually win or not, but because of health, we had a lot of discussions of not only do you want to do it, is this a healthy thing to do? And at least, you know, as her husband. And so we also had a lot of discussions once she became mayor. She knew she was going to be busy. She wanted to be busy doing this stuff, right? She knew she was going to be busy and stressful, and that obviously it was going to be more than just me arguing about public policy, right? Now she's got a whole group of people that are going to argue with her in a very public way, which can become stressful. And she knew all that. But we tried to figure out pretty rapidly what was the best way to help her with her health. Number one, me not mansplain to her as she came down the hallway. That was actually an easy one for her to set that straight. But number two, we'll just get up as early as we need to so that she has time to run, walk, get her head and heart in priority, and then she goes off to City Hall, you know, sometimes pretty early. But what that means is now very often we're up at 4:30 or 4:45 in the morning, and we're outside as soon as first light, you know, way before sunrise. I bring all that up because yes, we enjoy that. But I would say if someone were to say, Tim, what are your duties as first dude, first whatever you want to call me, certainly as a husband, I think I know, because that's 7 days out of the week now, that in my opinion, that's a big part. And so the people at home know, I am not trying to direct city policy at all. All I'm trying to do is mostly be a listening ear, but mainly try to help her from the health aspect. And I'm talking holistically. I'm talking, you know, mentally, spiritually, the heart. And if she goes off to work and I hear that authentic laugh, even if it's at me, I'm like, okay, she's good for another day, you know? So as a kid in Delaware, we used to go to the Jersey Shore. So that was certainly some of it. And you know, I don't know why. I remember again being very young, and at some point just hearing a seagull, even if I was even in Philadelphia, you know, a long way off. If I heard that as a kid, I was like, I could smell the salt air. And so then when we moved to Corpus Christi, Texas, and we could actually get in the water and surf and sail, just something about the ocean. You know, I love going to church. I love being with people. But I do kind of say in a serious way, very often, the ocean is kind of my church. I have a favorite, you know, we all have, or I think a lot of us have a certain song that we wake up to with our alarm. Mine is the Three Sunrises by U2. And it's just about that whole rising sun and the spiritual aspect of it. So don't get me wrong. I love the sport of surfing. No doubt about it. I'm stiffer than I would like to be these days. But I love the exhilarating sport of it. But anybody who's been around me knows that if I can just get in the ocean and start paddling, the rest of it's kind of gravy. Now, I do have to say that when you're on the ocean, outside of the ocean, what do you see in front of you? The sky. And here I am, this weather freak. I truly do mean this, and some high school teachers, I think, and even 4th and 5th grade teachers understood what I was saying when I would then say this to school kids that I've said over the decades. I think because I surfed, it kept me focused on that meteorology thing through high school. With all us, or at least I was a crazy, dumb high school boy, but surfing, because of course surf is created by the weather, that I do think that helped me stay focused on, Tim, you want to be a meteorologist, Tim, you want to be a meteorologist. And so to this day, it really is amazing how those two totally intertwined for me. First of all, I'm glad you asked me. And I actually appreciate it and take it as a compliment when even people on the street ask me about whether we want to call it the dark chapter, the DUI. It was one very dark night. It took me a few hours to get out of my own, I was making excuses and realized it was actually the bottom of what had been I don't even know how many years spiral I was on. And so yes, it was dark, and yet now coming up on 12 years later, I know I am so much a better person because of it. There's a phrase that some of us use, which is, I shall not regret the past nor shut the door on it. And that's how I feel about that. I say that for myself. In other words, I would not recommend anybody to take that roadmap, but because of that roadmap, I know that that the relationships I have with people, they're so much more authentic than they used to be. My friends used to joke, I'd run down the beach every day, and my friends would be there, and I really would get in the zone. But I would smile to them or wave, and they would call me on it. They'd say, Tim, you just gave me a TV Tim smile. But there was something to that as the years went on, I sort of developed this TV Tim shell and ways to numb out and all those kind of things. And I was not living a real life. And my life is so much more authentic now. That's not even a word I would have used 12 years ago. But I'll tell you what, I was told early on when I didn't know if I was going to come back, I didn't know I was going to have a job at all. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know where Donna was going to be with me. And the people, at least, that mattered most, and I don't mean necessarily my closest people, the closest. In fact, I didn't know necessarily all the people that mattered most until I realized, oh, this person's giving me a chance. This person is, but anyhow, someone told me early on, they said, Tim, if you can be honest, different people will accept you at different times, sometimes in a month, sometimes in 10 years, but they will. Just keep being honest with people. And I am just forever grateful how people in their own way and their own timing, and when I say people, I mean everything from Donna to my closest family members, but people in grocery stores who at one point or another, I call it eyeballing. And they were like, okay, we'll accept you where you are. In fact, some people, amazingly, have then come up to me and say, hey, I was there at one point, or I was just there. Can you help me with? So yes, dark moment. But when I have that spirit of that sunrise song going, I'm actually grateful that I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to learn from it. How about that? So yeah, so we have definitely talked, and we've talked about really some of the things we've just talked about. That I think one of Lou's great talents is his hesitate to even say personality. His authentic nature comes out, so he naturally does that. And I've reminded him as often as I can. I don't know how much he actually listens to me. Of that's one of your strengths. So don't use that. Don't pull away from that. To not spend too much. I mean, since you're asking me the question, don't spend too much energy trying to figure out where management is. And I'm not talking about this particular management, but over 43 years, I've had a lot of different managers, but there are some similarities. And one of the things I think I've learned as an employee is that don't spend too much energy on where management is. Do your job. Don't forget about the people. That if you're really forecasting for people, instead of worrying about management probably is going to be pretty flexible with you as well. And then as a forecaster, I've again, he knows a lot of this stuff. He's been around. But as a forecaster, I've reminded him where I at least personally think I was able to take it to the next notch for me. Of course, we all want to be the best forecasters. But I would say in the first 10, probably 20 years, especially when it came to hurricane forecasting, I could get very uptight. Now that makes sense, right? But I realized I was getting uptight because I was nervous about was I right on the forecast? And don't get me wrong, I still want to be right. But I eventually learned, I think it was a gradual process, where I was starting to spend way more energy with my brain in how can I best help people make decisions? Can you hear the difference there? And as I made that transition, it helped me calm down and get centered. And so again, he knows this, but I've reminded him a few times that, don't get too hung up on whether or not you're making the perfect forecast. If you can be focusing on what kind of decisions are they're trying to make out there. And then the very last, actually I said two final things to him while we were sitting on the truck. I said, don't forget you're never alone. And I said, always stay curious. So I'll leave it with that for Lou. Well, of course, I'm going to go to the hurricane. But before I go to the hurricane, they're actually hurricanes. I learned that there's so many weather events that are not necessarily storm and life or death related, but that can be so significant to people. Whether it's a football game that some mom's taking their kids to, but they're sick, and what if it might rain, to a wedding that, of course, everybody wants it to be perfect, and everything in between. So especially right now, I can flash back to so many of those kind of forecasts to where I make them for people, but then I think I've thought about them over the weekend and worried. And I mean, there's a lot of big forecasts out there, but the two big ones that stand in my head are Matthew and then Irma. And without going through the whole bit, what was the hardest thing about Matthew was that we knew we were going to get hit hard. But meteorologically, we really thought we weren't going to get the eye wall, which is where exponentially the catastrophic stuff is. And yet forecast were that the eye wall was going to come ashore. And you never want to hype a hurricane, any storm, but you also want to make sure people are prepared. And we were following all the guidelines for evacuation, that whole process. But if people were listening to us, we were thinking maybe the eye wall is just going to stay offshore. That was super stressful because, of course, the last thing I wanted to do was to lead the team. And then even though we were telling people, if you're in an evacuation zone, evacuate. Don't take this lightly. We were doing all that. But if they were listening to us, they also probably heard we were thinking the worst part would stay just offshore. That was extremely stressful because you never know for sure. And if that had done something unexpected, and I remember specifically, and Donna heard me say this, that no meteorologist wants a hurricane, but in hurricane country, you also want to be up to it when the day comes. You know, that's your Super Bowl. But that happened in 2016, and I'd been here for for under 40 years, but over 30. And I remember specifically saying to Donna, "Okay, I've had my hurricane. I hope that's it." And daggum, here comes Irma. And of course, whereas Matthew, the big concern was coming in from the ocean, that's always the biggest concern, is the landfalling hurricane. But because of the St. Johns River, let's put it this way. For decades, if I said it once, I said it 1,000 times for folks who asked about the St. Johns River and flooding. I said, remember, because the St. Johns River acts more like a bay, that it would take a biblical flood. I literally said that. It would take a biblical flood to have the St. John's flood because of the river, not because of storm surge. And to this day, there's a debate, but Irma probably produced, that was a 1 in 500, maybe a 1 in 1,000 year rainfall event. You know, although we use the term storm surge for Irma, most of that technically wasn't storm surge. Most of it was rainfall. It's why the salinity levels went to 0. But suddenly, our city was flooding like I'd never seen it flood. And therefore, very respected forecasters in this area were going back the few other times that this had occurred. And there was a real concern that as bad as it was, once the winds became southerly, would blow from the south to the north, that then it was almost going to double up in height. And there was that concern. We thought, we don't think it's going to do that, but we were right on the edge, and so in many ways, wow, suddenly here we were right back to almost a Matthew type scenario. Now, fortunately, again, as bad as it was, we never really got that second big surge. And so I know you asked me for one event, but in my mind, the fact that those two just came back to back was, whew.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask one of what's your proudest moments over the 43 years, but it sounds like those two.
Those two were because as I have learned, it's not just forecasting, it's communicating. And I certainly have made many let's face it, I've made forecasts that were wrong, okay? No doubt about it. I've also made forecasts, though, that I thought were right, but I could tell by different people's interpretation that I didn't communicate that. So those were all about the forecast, but then also communicating, because it's that fine line of you don't want to overwarn, but you don't want to underwarn. You don't want to put people in harm's way. So yes, definitely. Those, you know, if I were to go to my 3 big swings, those 2 hurricanes, and then when I was given the opportunity to come back to work here, and people started giving me the opportunity, by far, those are the 3 big events here at the station. To not take myself so seriously. Oh my gosh, I'd probably look 15 years younger. And I was told that. I was told that by wise people here, people like, see if I can remember their names, Ed McCullough, I think his name was Mr. Alexander, Howard Kelly, the first general manager here. More than once, they told me, Tim, don't take yourself because I think they, here's an example. When Good Morning Jacksonville first started, it was only a 30-minute show, okay? It started at 6:30, all right? We know now that professional people, and it goes, 4 o'clock to 7:30, so 3.5 hours. We know that people want to be prepared. They come in here at about 3:30 to get ready, and it makes sense. I came in here at 2 in the morning for a 30-minute. That's how serious I took it. I can remember, and I'm not a person who typically cusses to this day. I can remember probably for months in a row, every day, if anybody was in the car with me and they weren't, I'd be driving over the Matthews Bridge with the window open, just screaming at myself, Tim, Deegan, you are the biggest idiot, because we ad-lib, and I wanted every show to be perfect, and none were perfect. And I would cuss myself out on the drive home, try it again the next day, and oh my gosh, yes, What is next for me? So my initial plan is to truly not have a plan, not have a schedule. I mean, the way I look at this is I loved my job. I still love forecasting, but I went straight from being Timmy Deegan to college to here. So the way I look at it, for 65 years, I've had a schedule. For 43 years, that schedule has involved socks and a tie. And so at least initially, with all due respect to my wife and the mayor, I will help out whenever I can. But initially, my plan is no socks, no tie, no schedule. And I'm just gonna stay curious, and we'll go from there. How long is the hair gonna get? Well, you know, some people ask me why, and I just think they're joking, and I laugh, and they say, really, Tim, what's the bit of hair? You gotta remember that before the digital era, barometers, like if there's one special instrument, it's the barometer, right? And before the digital era, we used to use hair because hair would absorb moisture. And you know what color hair absorbs moisture the best? And so was the preferred color hair to use in barometers? Blonde hair. So as far as why, I'll just leave it there. As you know, there was a brief period of, because I like to look professional, there was a brief period of time where I wanted to pull my hair back out of my face. So at least I could look professional on the air. So I really don't have a plan other than I want to get long enough where I can pull it back so that when I'm doing stuff with the mayor, you know, I can look like the first gentleman, and go from there. Let's see. So my legacy, that at least as the decades went on, in addition to always trying to do my best, that as the decades went on, I became someone who could help people make decisions, that I became somebody that they could trust. In other words, at least became an honest person. And that hopefully that whole part of meteorology that is inexact, you know, of course we want to nail every forecast, but that hopefully I've shared a little bit of, as much as I get frustrated, and I certainly know the viewer at home gets frustrated when we don't get the forecast right, that hopefully that I've shared a little bit of that inexact nature of meteorology is what still, to me as a 65-year-old, causes me awe and wonder, truly. And that if I've shared some of that at home, and that when folks look outside and see the moon rise or they see a sunset, or that we realize we have that in common with each other, then that would be fantastic.
Honey, I'm proud of you. I'm happy for you, so happy. I'm ready to have a burn the socks and ties party anytime you want to. And no matter what any other woman says when her husband retires, I'm actually looking forward to having you around more. But I might put you to work.
Tim, I first saw you on TV back in 2006. I was working at Naval Station Mayport. First Coast News was actually the TV station I put on. I remember watching you way back, 20 years ago.
When I interviewed here and I just spoke to him over the phone and I was trying to have a very professional conversation with him, but meanwhile I was fangirling in the background because everyone here knows that I grew up watching him.
First and foremost, thank you so much.
Tim, you have been an inspiration to me. You have only known me a few years, but I have known you pretty much my whole life. So I want to thank you for all the knowledge that you've given me before working with you and of course during working with you, and I'm still going to bug you after as well. So it's not goodbye.
I think just the wealth of knowledge you've had and you've been able to provide to me, just the small inkling of that, I'm so grateful for and thankful for. So thankful for that, and also for the surfboard you lended me to try surfing and failed miserably. So enjoy retirement, Tim.
I got to be able to sit right next to you. Our desks are side by side and just download that information from you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
So the 15 years I got to spend with you, it's been like a book. You can't stop turning the pages, but we're at the last page and the book's closing. That chapter of my book now, it's going to be one that I flip back to for the rest of my life. It's going to be one I smile fondly on and look back at and flip through and read often. Tim, I can't thank you enough for that, man. And I say I'd love to see you as much as possible, but really my hope for you is that you're not around enough to call and to see often. I'm hoping I'm getting the message that maybe in a couple of months when I'm back from Costa Rica or one of my surf trips around the world or my tour of Europe, and I hope you're traveling. I hope you enjoy all of it, and from time to time I'm going to want to pick up that book or maybe just start writing new chapters, and I'll know who to call and text. I love you, man. Thank you for everything.